Greetings, and this is the last lambing learning, although there will be a very intimate and farewell to the lambing learnings coming up quite soon. And it will include a summary, quite unusual summary about the whole adventure. But for now, the last learning really summarizes how the hell we got through it. And I'm not just talking about me. I'm talking about the dear shepherd friend who had to endure someone who was not a natural. If you have listened to some of the other learnings, you'll understand why that is absolutely true. And the answer is what got us through? Easy. Laughter, humour, black humour, unwoke, criminal, distasteful humour, un-PC quips, sexist humour, lewd, rude, silly, childish. There wasn't a lot of it, but when the tiredness was just too much, or the mistake, beyond a joke, it popped the balloon of anger and of frustration, and often for me, feeling that I was just hopeless, because most of the comments as to my performance were accompanied with a little humour. There, that's the confession and admission. So examples, none, and that's quite interesting. Truly, I can't remember anything to share. All those little jokes and quips, they arose and they blew away exactly as needed and as they were meant to. Oh, there is just one. It's tiny and it's kind of mildly humorous, and it's certainly none of the things that I just mentioned, which was when I'd managed to inject the shepherd 3 times, obviously by accident, with a needleful of something to stop sheep getting scab and other nasties. On the third instance, he did swear on all 3, because actually those needles are really sharp and they do hurt. But on the third instance, he just looked at me and he said, "You're very keen on ensuring I don't get worms, aren't you?" So how kind, how lovely. Anyway, I've witnessed this kind of humour before, and also really, really black humour, with those at the sharpest end in the military and in the essential services and in what they would call the death trade. And it seems to me that humour is necessary cushioning when drawing on those last reserves in the face of witnessing maybe unspeakable suffering and atrocities. And others who are not in that space find it extremely unpalatable and tend to judge very harshly, especially after the event. You know, sometimes I think it does arise in the absence of having the emotional maturity to be witnessing such things, but more often, I suspect it's that in those moments, the emotions simply cannot be processed. And they are usefully parked by this marvelous skill and eruption and quality of humour. And there's a reason for it. It allows resilience and dealing with the practicalities at hand to take priority. So Chogyam Trungpa refers to the gift of humour repeatedly in Shambhala Path of the Sacred Warrior, the Sacred Path of the Warrior, and says of the quality of enlightened confidence. Just as a solid oak tree is swayed by the wind, so a sense of humour makes a person playful. Because of this playfulness and humour, there is no room for depression. So it's good to lighten up And sometimes I take life very seriously, and humour can be such a lovely antidote to that. So I recall the underlying reason why playwright and screenwriter and wartime coding genius wrote the hugely popular post-war play called The Girl Who Couldn't Quite. And it's about a girl who couldn't quite laugh or be happy. And she eventually does. I'm not going to give the spoiler away by telling you how, and that happens. But he wrote this specifically because he was greatly interested in the subconscious and psychology to get audiences laughing. Because if they started laughing, they would also open up to being able to cry and grieve the losses that at that time were being hugely suppressed by the stiff British upper lip. So he used to monitor, actually, I happen to know, sit at the back of performances and monitor people's reactions and see when they started crying with laughter, how then also it prompted being able to then weep for those they'd lost and grieve. And that's curious and interesting too, isn't it? I think in the acting profession, some actors actually try laughing outrageously before they have to then perform something very tragic. So the two are they live side by side, and yet they're polar opposites. Wonderful. So here's a little example from the experience I had with me and my sister and my mum in the last days of my dad's life, where humour did something incredible. My sister kicked a bucket underneath his hospital bed, which we had in the front room. He was in it. And she just said, without even thinking, oops, I just kicked the bucket. And then she added, oops, sorry, not the right phrase in the circumstances. And we just all, the two of us, just dissolved into fits of laughter because my father was very aware of the journey he was going on, and the heavy tension of the time just evaporated. And as we turned to look at the figure in the bed between us, his familiar right-mouthed, sideways hint of a smile danced across his face. And I just love the thought that my dad, who loved wordplay and puns, especially if they were a little gently irreverent, that touched him and amused him and kind of maybe delighted him in witnessing something that happens very rarely, I think, between many sisters, that underlying kind of acknowledgement of an understanding and a special humour that only if you're going through something like that you can access. And we shared that. And so it was really a very tender moment, just without a doubt, full of humour in the direst, really, of circumstances. So there we go. Have you had any experiences there where humour has helped you just get through a nightmare or arisen, and it looked to anyone else that, how can you laugh at this time? But actually it brought something quite healing or energizing to the circumstances. I would love to hear. I hope you've enjoyed this last lambing learning, and will come with me on the ride for the summary, where we will also visit the week after lambing, which carries its own little story. But for now, thanks for watching. Bye bye.